Hey guys. Okay, so today we are starting to read The Legend of Sleepy Hollow Part 2. You are going to continue to annotate just like you did yesterday, except this time I'm not going to tell you what to annotate. I'm just going to read to you and you do it. So hopefully today's video will be shorter since I won't be stopping a lot, okay? Okay. Among the music students who assembled one evening each week to learn from Ichabod Crane was Katrina Van Tassel. She was a blooming lass of 18 years, plump and rosy-cheeked, and universally famed for her beauty. She was something of a flirt and dressed to show off her charms. She wore ornaments of pure gold, which her great-great-grandmother had brought over from Europe, and a short petticoat which revealed the prettiest foot and ankle in Sleepy Hollow. Ornaments, by that they mean jewelry. Ichabod Crane had a soft and foolish heart toward women. It was no surprise that so tempting a creature soon found favor in his eyes, especially after he had visited her in her father's mansion. Old Baltus Van Tassel was a perfect picture of a thriving, contented farmer. His home was situated on the banks of the Hudson River, in one of those green, fertile nooks in which the Dutch farmers are so fond of nestling. A great elm tree spread its broad branches over it, and at the foot of which bubbled up a spring of the softest and sweetest water. Near the farmhouse was a vast barn, every window and crevice of which seemed to be bursting forth with the treasures of the farm. The schoolmaster's mouth watered as he looked up upon this promise of luxurious winter food. In his mind's eye, he pictured every pig running about with a puddling in his belly and an apple in his mouth, the pigeons in a pie, and the geese swimming in their own gravy. The conquest of his heart was complete. Ichabod imagined all of this as he looked over the fat meadow lands, the rich fields of wheat, rye, and buckwheat and Indian corn. As he did, his heart yearned for the damsel who was to inherit these lands. His imagination expanded with the idea, thinking of how the lands might be turned into cash, the money invested in immense tracts of wild land. He pictured the blooming Katrina, a whole family of children mounted on top of a wagon. He pictured himself on a pacing mare with a colt at her heels setting out for Kentucky, Tennessee, or Lord knows where. When he entered the house, the conquest of his heart was complete. It was one of those spacious farmhouses built in the style of the first Dutch settlers, with a piazza along the front. From the piazza, Ichabod entered the hall, which formed in the center of the mansion, in a place of usual residence. Here, rows of splendid pewter ranged along the dresser dazzled his eyes. Ears of Indian corn and strings of dried apples and peaches hung in chains along the walls, and an open door gave him a peep into the parlor, where the claw-footed chairs and the dark mahogany table shone like mirrors. In the corner cupboard, knowingly left open, displayed immense treasures of old silver and fine china. From the moment Ichabod laid eyes upon these regions of delight, he lost his peace of mind. All he could think was how to gain the affections of the beautiful Katrina Van Tassel. In this enterprise, however, he had more real difficulties than any knight of long ago, who rarely had to face anything but giants, enchanters, and dragons, and other such easily conquered adversaries. For a knight, winning the lady of his heart was as simple as carving his way to the center of a Christmas pie, meaning he uses a sword and kills people, right? And that's how he gets a girl. Ichabod, on the contrary, had to face all kinds of new difficulties and obstacles. He had to encounter a host of fearful adversaries of real flesh and blood. Katrina's numerous country admirers who kept a watchful eye upon her, ready to attack any new competitor. Okay, so the way this is being read by the narrator is completely ironic, right? Again, with the irony. So he's saying, back in the day, it was so easy for knights to get women. They just had to kill a bunch of people and monsters and all this. Ichabod has to prove he's better than all of the other guys trying to go after her. So it's obviously being very sarcastic, very ironic, which is something you can highlight, by the way. That is part of style on Twist, so that's something you can do. Also, I did not say this at the beginning. I'm so sorry. I completely blanked and just jumped straight into reading. Our questions today are going to be focusing on author's purpose and characterization. So I'm wanting you to highlight any diction you find in this. Remember, diction means word choice, and these are all word choices, yes, but highlight the ones that reflect characterization, so ones that tell us about Ichabod, not just about what he looks like, but who he is, how he behaves. Okay, so there are a lot of those. And also diction that kind of tells us why the author may have written this. That may hint at that. Okay, here we go. There goes Brom Bones and his gang. Among these, the most formidable was a burly, roaring man named Brom Van Brunt. He was the hero of the country road, which rang with his feats of strength and daring. From his Herculean frame and great strength, he had received the nickname Brom Bones, by which he was universally known. He was always ready for a fight or a frolic, but had more mischief and ill will in him, and a strong dash of good humor. He had 3 or 4 close friends who regarded him as their model, and the head of whom he scoured the country, attending every scene or feud or merriment for miles around. Sometimes his crew would be heard dashing past the farmhouses at night, whooping and hollering at the old dames. Startled out of their sleep, would exclaim, "Hey, there goes Brom Bones and his gang." Sorry, I don't say "a" very often. It did not come out naturally. The neighbors looked upon him with a mixture of awe, admiration, and goodwill. This wild hero had for some time singled out Katrina for the object of his attention, and it was whispered that she did not discourage his hopes. Brom Bones' advances were signals for rivals to retire. When his horse was seen tied to Van Tessel's fence on a Sunday night, it was a sure sign that his master was courting, and all of the other suitors passed by in despair. Such was the formidable rival that Ichabod Crane had to face. Considering all things, a stouter man than he would have shrunk from the competition, and a wiser man would have despaired. He had, however, a happy mixture of pliability and persistence in his nature. Though he bent, he never broke, and though he bowed beneath the slightest pressure, the moment it went away, jerk! He was erect and carried his head high as ever. To have taken the field openly against his rival would have been madness. Ichabod, therefore, made his advances in a quiet and gently suggestive manner. Under cover of character of singing master, he made frequent visits to the farmhouse. Ichabod would carry on his suit with the daughter by the side of the spring under the great elm, or walking along in the twilight, that hour so favorable to lovers. Ichabod was too wary to give him an opportunity. From the moment Ichabod Crane made his advances, the interest of Brom Bones evidently declined. His horse was no longer seen tied to the fence on Sunday nights, and a deadly feud even arose between him and the schoolmaster of Sleepy Hollow. Brom would gladly have settled his dispute in the way of old knights, by single combat. But Ichabod was too conscious of the superior might of his adversary to accept the challenge against him. He had overheard Bones boast that he would double the schoolmaster up and lay him on the shelf of his own schoolhouse. Ichabod was too wary to give him an opportunity. There was something extremely provoking in this refusal. It left Brom no alternative but to draw upon his rustic waggery and to play practical jokes upon his rival. Okay, so basically, Ichabod will not fight Brom because he knows better. He's too big, right? So Brom is like, all right, he doesn't want to fight. I'm going to play some pranks on him. Very mature, I know. Brom Bones and his gang of rough riders attacked Ichabod's peaceful domains, smoked out his singing school by stopping up the chimney, and they broke into the schoolhouse at night and turned everything topsy-turvy, so that the poor schoolmaster began to think all of the witches in the country held their meetings there. But what was still more annoying, Brom took every opportunity to ridicule Ichabod in the presence of Katrina. In this way, matters went on for some time without producing any significant changes. Okay, so remember, keep in mind that Ichabod is very superstitious. He reads a lot of those books and, yeah, just very superstitious. So, of course, when everything's all topsy-turvy, he just assumes the witches did it and not that he was being pranked, okay? Like a knight in a quest of adventures. One fine autumn afternoon, Ichabod sat on the lofty stool from where he usually watched over his students. The children were all busily intent upon their books or slyly whispering behind them with one eye kept on the master, and a kind of buzzing stillness resigned throughout the schoolroom. It was suddenly interrupted by the appearance of a man mounted on the back of a ragged wild colt. He came up to the school door with an invitation to Ichabod to attend a quilting frolic to be held that evening at Mr. Van Tassel's. Having delivered this message, the man dashed over to the brook and was seen scampering away up the hollow. After school ended, the gallant Ichabod spent at least an extra half hour at his toilet, brushing and cleaning his suit and arranging his hair in the mirror. So he may look like a true gentleman. He borrowed a horse from the farmer with whom he was staying. Thus gallantly mounted, he went off like a knight in quest of adventures. By toilet, by the way, they mean bathroom. He doesn't mean like he was washing his clothes in the toilet or anything. It was, as I have said, a fine autumn day. The sky was clear and serene, and the forests were brown and yellow, with leaves of orange, purple, and scarlet. As Ichabod rode along, his eye ranged with delight over the treasures of jolly autumn. On all sides he sought vast stores of apples, some hanging in trees, others gathered in baskets for the market. Farther on, he saw some great fields of Indian corn and yellow pumpkins laying beneath them, turning up their fair round bellies to the sun. Soon he passed the fragrant buckwheat fields, breathing the odor of the beehive, and thought of pancakes well buttered and garnished with honey, made by the delicate little hand of Katrina Van Tassel. The sun eventually began to set. Thus, feeding his mind with many sweet thoughts, he journeyed through the hills along the Hudson. The sun eventually began to set to the west. A few amber clouds floated in the sky without a breath of air to move them. The horizon was of a fine golden tint, changing slowly into a pure apple green, and from that into the deep blue of mid-heaven. A slanting ray lingered on the woody crests of the cliffs that overhung some parts of the river, giving greater depth to dark gray and purple off their rocky sides. A sailboat was floating in the distance, dropping slowly down with the tide, her sail hanging uselessly against the mast. As the reflection of the sky gleamed along the still water, it seemed as if the boat was suspended in the air. To be continued. Okay, so our questions. These are over author's purpose and characterization, and oh, yep, we just have 2. Okay, question number 1. Think about the historical significance of this story and Irving's targeted audience. What is the most likely reason the author wrote this story? To inform the readers of a ghost in their town? To entertain the reader with a ghost story they can relate to? To persuade the readers to read more of his stories? To defend people who believe in the supernatural? Okay. So every piece of literature that you read is going to have a purpose, and it's usually to inform, entertain, persuade, or defend. Informational or expository, that's the essay you're going to write this year on the test. You're just informing. You're telling us about something. You're not arguing per se. You're not defending anything, although you do have a thesis that you'll want to defend, but you're just informing. That kind of stuff uses facts. It uses nonfiction, true things to defend your point. This is not a true story by any means. It's very much fictional, so it's not going to be to inform. Okay, to entertain the reader with a ghost story they can relate to. This story is made to entertain. That's the whole point. But by setting it in this historical time period, in the place that he came from, that he grew up in, he wrote this when he was living in England, but he grew up in New York, and he wrote it for New Yorkers, for the Knicks, right? He did that because it's something they could relate to, and so everybody loved reading it. If they wrote a ghost story that became wildly popular about Robinson, Texas, and it was a short story, everyone would probably read it, right? Yeah, we have a haunted town. There's a ghost story written about us. It's super famous. They teach it at schools. You should read it. It's definitely was so that people could relate to it. It was not to persuade anybody of anything. And it wasn't to defend people who believe in the supernatural. A defense is going to have arguments and claims, and it's not doing that. He's just telling you a story. So the correct answer there is going to be B. Okay, number 2. With which answer choice would the villagers of Sleepy Hollow most likely agree? Option 1. Brom Bones was a menace who spent his time terrorizing the countryside and encouraging his peers to misbehave. Okay, now remember, this is the choice the villagers would most likely agree, not us. Excuse me, the villagers who lived at Sleepy Hollow. Option 2. Brom Bones was a mischievous prankster who could be disruptive at times, but ultimately never meant to cause anyone harm. Which details from the story best support your response? A. Option 1. Among these, the most formidable was a burly, roaring man named Brom Van Brunt. Brom would gladly have settled this dispute in the way of the old knights by single combat. Okay, so this is kind of a two-part question. First of all, it's asking you to pick one, option 1 or option 2. What do we think the people really thought about Brom? And then you have to defend it. Okay, so Brom Bones did kind of terrorize people. However, it did say that all of the women loved him and like people respected him. So option 2 is going to be the better answer though. He was mischievous. I mean, he was disruptive, but he wasn't like a bad person. He was just messing with a guy who wanted his girl, right? So option 2, he was the hero of the country road which rang with his feats of strength and daring. From his Herculean frame and great strength, he had received the nickname Brom Bones, by which he was universally known. So maybe, right, that's telling us that he's well known and the people do kind of like him, right? Or our other option 2, we've already ruled out A and C because they pick option 1. Sometimes his crew would be heard dashing past the farmhouses at midnight, whooping and hollering, and the old dames, startled out of their sleep, would exclaim, "Hey, there goes Brom Bones and his gang." The neighbors looked upon him with a mixture of awe, admiration, and goodwill. Okay, so this option 2 is going to be the better answer because this one is talking, it's saying he was ready for a fight, but he had more mischief. He had 3 or 4 close friends. It's mostly talking about his friends. This one is talking about other people. So it tells us he's mischievous. He's dashing past the farmhouses at midnight. But it also says they looked upon him with awe, admiration, and goodwill, meaning they wish the best for him. They like him. So the best answer choice here is going to be D. Okay, please let me know if you have any questions. Make sure you highlight your answer choices there, and then make sure you go back and submit this on Schoology, okay? Email or call with any questions at all that you may have. I'll see you tomorrow.